Hi everyone, thank you for being here. We're pretty happy to present at Hack.lu. Our talk is about a group called Snake. We call it Turla, so you will hear the Turla name quite often. Today this is an APT group, so a group doing espionage. So we, Matthieu and I, will be talking about some of the recent campaigns we've seen and also some of the tools we've uncovered, and that gives us a glimpse on how these guys are operating. But first, I'm Boutin. This is Matthieu. Faou. We're both malware researchers. We're both based in Montreal. We're working for ESET as malware researchers. So we do reverse engineering, malware analysis, and we kind of try to piece together all different campaigns out there of different threat actors. So if we could take a quick look at what we're going to see today. So first of all, I'll go through a small introduction. So I assume that many of you know what is Turla. On the other hand, maybe some of you don't know that. So we'll look at some of the very high-profile hacks that these guys have been doing. Then we'll look at getting in and keeping access. So what I mean by this is kind of the overall cycle that these guys go through, from the infection vector to lateral movement to even cleaning the system once they're found, and finally getting back. So some of the ways that they use to get back in networks that they lost access to. And then Matthieu will take over and we'll talk about advanced communications. So we published a report 2 months ago about an Outlook plugin that is used to exfiltrate data and generally spy on their victims. And Matthieu will go through all the technical details of this particular backdoor. So let's start. So Turla, also known as Snake, it's a group that targets mostly government officials, diplomats, and they are very, very active. They are making campaigns all the time, so we uncover new campaigns they're doing from time to time. What really kind of set them apart is the fact that they are very sophisticated. So the tools they use are very advanced. It's nice as researchers, as reversers, because we get to reverse malware that is not so simple. So it's a very nice work to do. So before talking about the technical aspect of it, I just wanted to show you a couple of acts that they are allegedly behind. So this one was kind of the first notorious hack. It happened in 2008. It was against the US military. And they, at that time, some US officials said that it was the worst breach in US military. So this was a big deal back then. It was made by a malware called agent.btz. And please remember that name, because we will talk a bit about this particular malware later on. And allegedly, it was on a USB flash. It was put on a USB flash and dropped outside a military complex in a parking lot. So an old trick that used to work well in 2008, right? So these guys, so someone would allegedly pick up the USB sticks, put it in the computer, and that's how everything started. And this agent.btz is actually a worm. So from there, it actually spread throughout the network. So it was a very high-profile hack, a big breach of the US military, and it actually led to the creation of the US Cyber Command. So that was a big thing for them. And then these guys, they really like to go after foreign affairs, so ministries of foreign affairs. Here we see a news clip from 2013 that they hacked the Finnish MFA. There are some other news that the Belgian MFA was hacked in 2004 as well. There are many very public hacks behind that these group allegedly did, and it keeps on going, right? And one that was more recent was this one. Back in 2018, so a few months ago, it was revealed that the German government was actually attacked by these guys. And what is interesting is that one of the tools they used during this attack was actually the Outlook plugin that Matthieu will talk about a bit later on in this presentation. So Turla, in short, one of the oldest espionage group. They target governments official, diplomats. They have a very large tool set, so they have a lot of tools, they have a lot of backdoors that target all major platforms, so Mac, Windows, Linux, and they always operate the same way. So they have infection vector, usually spear phishing or water rolling, and then they install a first stage backdoor, kind of assess whether the computer is interesting or not, and if it is, they will deploy their more sophisticated second stage backdoor. So these backdoor are usually way more persistent, way more stealthy, way more sophisticated, and you only use them when the target is of high value. So let's talk about how these guys are operating. So in this section, I will walk you through 4 main steps of what these guys are doing and providing you recent examples of of the tools they were using back then. So first, infection vector, how they get in, basically. Lateral movement, so how the initial breach is transformed into complete ownage of the network. And then finally, cleaning. So whenever they feel that they are outed, they will actually try very hard to hinder the incident response activities that is going on, and finally getting back. So how they are able to accumulate data that may allow them to get back in the network once they're out, right? So let's start with infection vectors. So as I said earlier, these guys mostly, they use spear phishing, so sending emails to targets with malicious attachments. Another thing they use quite a lot is water rolling. So they are trying to compromise websites that are likely to be visited by their target. So these are kind of the two the two vectors that they use most, which is quite common in APT group. But there was one particular infection vector that kind of stood out. So mosquito, this is a backdoor. So we did a research on this a few months ago, and this backdoor is used to target diplomats in Eastern Europe. So what we see with this group is some of their tools that actually use them in specific regions. In the mosquito case, according to our telemetry, it's mostly diplomats in Eastern Europe which were targeted. And how these guys were able to first get in the network was using a fake flash installer. So of course, this is not something new. It happens all the time. Cyber criminals use all type of fake installer to try to install their Trojan, their malware, and then install the real thing. But what was very, very different for this one, it was actually downloaded from this URL that you see here. So as you can see, this is the legitimate adobe.com, right? So it kind of triggered us to say, okay, what's going on here? Like, there are many, many different possibilities, but still it's kind of intriguing, right? So we had a couple of cases where we were able to trace down the full infection cycle. So a system that was requesting these Adobe Flash Installer using the URL that should reach the Adobe server, right? And what was interesting is that we were able to actually get the DNS requests that were issued by this system, and it was actually pointing to a valid IP address from Akamai. Akamai is the CDN of Adobe, right? So this looks very bad, right? Because you can think of several ways that these guys were able to get in, but one of them kind of comprises the compromise of Adobe, which is kind of a big thing. And in this particular case, the package that was returned from this legitimate IP address was actually this fake flash installer containing the mosquito backdoor. So we kind of sat down and drew what the different possibilities that could have explained this weird behavior we were seeing on the network. So this is what we came up with. So 5 different possibilities, right? The first one would be kind of a local man-in-the-middle tag. So think of host file modification, these type of things. The thing is, we know that the DNS request was returning the correct IP, so we kind of crossed that one pretty fast. The second one on compromised gateway. So if these guys were actually able to compromise a router or had some access to some kind of proxy where all the traffic of the organization was going through, they would be able to inspect the traffic. And one thing I forgot to mention, which is very important in this case, is that all these requests were using HTTP, so no encryption. So that means that an attacker could actually look at the data and mingle with it, inject payload, or do all types of nefarious things. So this possibility looked very interesting because, of course, if you compromise the gateway, then you have access, then this could explain the full behavior, because even if the packet is supposed to reach the real Adobe server, if it is intercepted, and then the server could send this fake flash installer. So the third option was that the ISP itself was modifying the traffic. What that means is that the ISP would be able to monitor all the traffic going in from all their clients, and we would be looking for specific IPs that would be targeted and inject them. So we can think of a compromised ISP, or maybe one that would be coerced to participate in this type of malicious activities. And it might sound a bit far-fetched, but it's not that far-fetched, because we know several modules that is actually able to do that. So maybe some of you know about FinFisher, which is a software that is used by law enforcement agency mainly, and there is a module there that can be installed in the ISP servers and that is able to inspect all the traffic. So we know the technology exists. So this is something that is possible. The fourth option would be BGP hijacking, so trying to reroute the IP on the fly to servers that the attacker could control. That being said, we looked at the different announcements, and we kind of crossed that one out as well because we didn't see anything malicious in while the attacks were ongoing. The fifth one would be the worst one, which would mean that the Adobe server would be compromised in some way, right? So really early on in this research, we reached out to Akamai and Adobe to kind of share with them IOCs and see if that was the case. And quickly enough, they told us, no, we're not seeing this type of activities on our server. So like we crossed this possibility right off the bat. So that means like the two most likely options would be 2 and 3, that along the way, from the compromised system or the soon-to-be compromised system all the way to the Adobe server would be some kind of gateway compromise or ISP that would be able to inject packet. And in the end, what we believe, we have no proof, of course, but what we believe is that this is actually man-in-the-middle done at the ISP level. So first of all, if like most of the cases we've seen was the first, like patient 0, right? So the first infection in the compromised organization. So it doesn't make sense that they would be able to compromise a gateway and then try to infect people inside. It kind of, if they already have their feet in the door, their foot in the door, they could just use that to infect. And the other thing is that all the victims are all within the reach of the same set of ISPs. So all the victims that we've seen the DNS request returning the correct IP address were all within the same region. So it kind of makes sense that it was more of an ISP, because otherwise you would have to compromise each gateway for each of these organizations. And then we saw multiple reinfection. What we mean by that is that these organizations were getting cleaned up, and then a few weeks later, a few days later, boom, again. So really, if they did the work right and that they were able to clean the system, there's no way that the gateway would be responsible for this. So because of all of this and all the thinking that we did together, we really believe that this is what they're doing, which is kind of concerning, right? Because we all know if you're doing a download through HTTP, if your ISP is kind of on their side, it's hard to avoid being infected. You really have to use HTTPS all the time. I think this is something that we are all aware of. But that being said, for this group, this is not something which is like that blew our mind, because we know that these guys, they're the satellite guys, right? They are using satellite IPs as CNC, so they have this all SIGINT capabilities, which kind of ties in nicely with this hypothesis. So let's move into lateral movement. So once they have access to the network, what are they doing? So we looked through the different campaigns they've been doing, and we tried to find most of the tools they're using to recover passwords. What's interesting is that they have some proprietary tools that we will take a look at, but they also have open source tool or public tool that they use to kind of blend in, right? It's harder to say that this is a specific group if it's a tool that every pen tester's on their uses, right? So let's take a quick look at the proprietary tools first. So one that was interesting is the network sniffing. And why I'm showing it to you is that we actually saw the command line that was used for this tool. So you can see it here. You can see it's trying to monitor specific IPs. I redacted them, but they are internal IPs. Then they're looking at all these ports and putting all the traffic they capture into a log file. You can see here the watch ports. There are many of them: TCP, HTTP, POP3, all types of traffic flow they could use to recover all kinds of information to do their spying, but also maybe they would be lucky and get some passwords out of this as well. The other proprietary tool I want to talk about is CleProxy. So this is an internal name. I guess that many other companies name it differently. How they use it is basically reverse shell. So they will spin it on a system, and then the operators can remotely connect to it, and they have access to a command.exe process, right? So they can list files, they can basically go around the network. And they also have special commands. I've listed some of them there. So you have ability to download executable, upload executable. So you basically have a shell where you can do your work of pen testers and try to infect other machines on the network. Now let's take a look at the different open source tools that we've seen. And it kind of fits in the general trend. The Mosquito backdoor that we talked about a few slides ago, we know that through the process of compromising a system, they also use Meterpreter. So there seems to be a shift towards the usage of more open source tools for this group. So this one is quite sparse with them. So all of the tools I'll be looking at are mostly to dump passwords from a compromised system. So this one is from Quark's lab. It was published in 2012. There's a GitHub page, basically trying to recover hashes of passwords from local accounts, cache domain credentials as well, and they have other possibilities. The other one, Mimikatz, I guess that this tool doesn't need any introduction. We see it all the time, so this is not tied to Turla at all. Mimikatz is used by a lot of cyber criminals, and of course, a lot of other legit people as well. But Mimikatz is trying to recover passwords from memory, and it has other possibilities, but we assume this is how they use it. Then we have Lasagne, which is a tool, again, open source. There's a GitHub page, and it's meant to recover passwords from many, many different applications. So you can see here a screenshot of the command line help, and it can recover passwords stored in browsers, instant messengers, databases, passwords, Wi-Fi, even source control application like Git and SVN. So it's very powerful. Then some public tools, Nearsoft. I guess many of you are familiar with this suite of tools. They have many, many different binaries available on their software that they claim to be password recovery tool. And we found these three specific tools to, again, get access to passwords that will be stored in the browsers, passwords that will be stored in my clients, and also messenger apps. So they would be able to recover these different tools. And of course, using these passwords, we can assume that they are then using them to try to move laterally on the network. One thing that we found that we're pretty excited about is this one. So Comrat is a second stage backdoor that is used by these guys, and it's actually an evolution of agent.btz. So if you guys remember the first news clip I showed you about the US military network, it was actually this malware that was used in this thing. So they are constantly improving their tools. And we were actually able to recover a lot of evidence from a live Comrat infection. So we were able to gather malware files, but also log files, and we were able to see that this Comrat tool was used as part of the lateral movement. So not only Comrat was present on the system, there was also a keylogger, there was also a recent file scrapper that would just go in, and every time that a new document was saved or a new document was created, it would just compress it and make it available for the backdoor to upload it directly to the CNC server. And the log files were really, really useful to understand how these guys were actually using this tool, right? So we have the log files that covers a 3 months period. And it was really a two-step process. So once you decrypted the log files, you could see that in the first few days, they would issue commands that are likely to be done in network assessment or trying to move laterally. And then for the following days, over the 3 months period, they were just monitoring the network, making sure that they were not detected, making sure that their backdoor still had access to the command and control server. So there exist several commands that can be sent to the Comrat backdoor. We will focus only on two because these were the main ones that were used. So the first one is changing the CNC server, so they can issue a command just to update this, and then finally to execute commands. So they will send a command, and it will just spawn and command.exe process and run this command, right? So I've made a little graph. So this is the first few days. So you can see here they execute mostly commands. They updated a little bit the CNC server, but most of the commands we received from the CNC server were about executing commands. So the first thing they did is that they installed a tool that was able to dump the security account manager, so trying to recover hashes of passwords. And then they updated the backdoor, and then they issued a lot of commands. So they were listing groups that were in the domain. They were listing users that were in the domains as well. They were trying to see for specific users, gaining specific information. So this was all commands that you could expect a pen tester to issue while he has access to a shell on a target system. And then after these first few days, it was kind of a monitoring period where the updates, the update of the CNC servers were the commands that we've seen the most. So they were trying to make sure that these CNCs would always be available for them. So this is the end of the lateral movement. So as you can see, a mix of proprietary public tool. Once they're in, they try to expand and try to reach systems that will contain the information they are looking for. But cleaning. So they are very, very careful to clean the logs, clean the task as they go along. So we were very happy to see that some of these logs were not cleaned, because usually when you get in the system, they cleaned everything. So all the logs are gone, all the tasks they received from the CNC server are gone as well. But in this case, we were lucky. So if we look at the cleaning phase, Gazer, which is a second stage backdoor that was used for a few years. We have a white paper on this one if you are interested to know the details. Here I will just focus on the cleaning part. So all the important files are on this, like logs files, and they also have registry keys that they use to hold certain information like tasks. And they have regular cleanup. So whenever after a few days of using this backdoor, every time you receive a task, they will issue this command here that we see, CMC take loader body, which will clean the logs, clean the tasks to make sure that if it's discovered, then nobody will be able to see what happened and what was exfiltrated, right? But they also have a standalone cleaner. So at some point, we felt that they kind of knew we were onto them, and they downloaded and executed this cleaner, which really wiped out everything. So all the logs, all the registry keys. So they really have tools that are dedicated to make sure that all the evidence are cleaned. We also found an undocumented backdoor. Why undocumented? Because we couldn't find any reference in the public domain. And what's bad about it is that we were able to recover some modules of it, but not enough to have the full picture. And by the time we're trying to piece all the puzzle together, they just cleaned everything. So it's interesting because they rather delete everything on the system than having their most recent malware analyzed, right? Because they know ESET will probably publish something, so they just delete everything and then they went away. So we're still working on this one, but I wanted to show this example because this is something we see all the time. So finally, getting back really quickly on this one. So we know that they could reuse the passwords that they gathered throughout. So if the organizations did not make the correct changes, they could be re-breach through that, right? But a cool example is Mosquito. So Mosquito is a backdoor we looked at a bit earlier. So it will actually create a user account, help assistant, and this is a legitimate account that is used through remote assistance sessions. So it's a user account that will be created once you try to create such a session. But the Mosquito will actually create this user account that can then be used to get back the access on the network, and then finally collects Wi-Fi credentials through the installer. So the installer has this command that you see here, so the net /wn export, and it will export all profiles that is stored on the computer, giving them all the Wi-Fi passwords, which would allow them probably to do all types of things, connect to this AP, trying to get back inside the network through this mean. And I guess you guys are aware of all the different news that went on with the Dutch government, the US government as well, with all the pictures of the equipment in the trunk of the car. So this is maybe something that went on there. So now, Matthieu?
So for the last part of this talk, I will present the Outlook backdoor, which is a really good example of advanced communications they can use. So this research started in 2018 when the breach of the German government went public. So in this article from Spiegel, which is a well-known German newspaper, they say the group Snake is said to have attacked the German government network. So this attack was attributed to the Turla group. Then a few days later, some details came out. So this is an article from the SZ, which is another well-known German newspaper, in which they say hackers have been able to copy data from the government networks via the Outlook mail program. So it was clear that during these attacks, the Turla operators leveraged their Outlook backdoor. Also, the existence of this backdoor has been known for years in the community, but there were no public reports. So we decided it was time to look deeper. The targets are in line with traditional Turla targets. We saw some Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Europe and some defense contractors, but we probably don't have a full visibility on the victims, so maybe there are some other organizations targeted. The oldest trace of this Outlook backdoor is a compilation timestamp in 2009. I know that Turla developers sometimes change the compilation timestamp in order to fool researcher, but this sample is very basic, so I think it was really the genuine timestamp. Then in 2010, the first sample was uploaded on VirusTotal. So it reinforced the fact that the compilation timestamp of 2009 was real. Since then, they made a few changes. So the oldest version were just dumping the content of the Outlook folder. So it was more like a plugin for their other backdoors than a backdoor by itself. But starting in 2013, they added the possibility to execute commands that were sent by email in XML format in the body of the email. So it's now a full backdoor that can execute commands. Then in 2016, they switched from XML to a blob of data in a custom format that is inserted in a PDF document. And this PDF document is attached to an email and sent to the real mailbox of the victim. So that's not, the backdoor is not connecting to a remote address controlled by the attacker. It really uses the mailbox of the victim. So I'm not 100% sure of this date. Maybe it was in 2015 because a compilation timestamp was in 2015, but the first time I saw it in the wild was in 2016. Then in March 2018 was the public announcement of the German incident in which Turla used this Outlook backdoor. And a disclaimer, we are not involved in any way in the incident response of this incident. And then last August we published our report. So in the most recent version, the installation is done by the backdoor DLL itself. And previously they was using a dropper that was similar to dropper used by Comrats. It used COM object hijacking, which is really a common technique for Turla that is used in Comrat on Mosquito, for example. If you want some background information, I put two links. So this is really not new techniques. Links are from 2011, 2014. But it works well, so they're still using that to establish persistence. And in particular, it uses the Outlook Protocol Manager, which is the COM object responsible for Outlook MAPI communication. So each time Outlook is launched, the DLL of the backdoor is also loaded. As a reminder, COM objects are defined as HKey grassroots, which is kind of concatenation of HKey current user and HKey local machine. And HKey current user can be modified with limited user privileges, so this backdoor doesn't need admin rights to be installed. This is the CLS ID of the Outlook Protocol Manager. You can see there is a redirection to another CLS ID. This CLS ID has an arbitrary value and is not used by any non-application, so it was only added by Turla. And you can see that this CLS ID is linked to the DLL of the backdoor. So when Outlook call the Outlook Protocol Manager, it will actually load the malicious DLL. MAPI is a messaging application programming interface, which is a standard Microsoft API aiming at providing to third-party software a way to be kind of email aware. And actually, with the COM object hijacking, the backdoor replaces all MAPI32.dll, which is a Microsoft DLL responsible, used by Outlook to interact with MAPI. So first, the backdoor connects to the mailbox using the standard function MAPI logon. Then it will open several folders. Here it opens the Outbox folder. It can also set callbacks on folders using the hrlock advising function. So now I will so they put callbacks on both the inbox and outbox folder. So I will describe these two callbacks. So the first one, for the outgoing email, it will basically forward all the emails sent by the victim to the attacker's email address. So we can see it in the logs. So this is the logs of the backdoor. You can see that the victim sent an email to recipient@example.com. The subject and the attachment name is also logged. And just after, this email is also sent to the attacker. And finally, the backdoor clean any trace of this activity. So it will delete the message sent to the attacker. So once the victim goes in Outlook and check in the send folder, they won't be able to see this additional email. And not only the email sent by the victim are exfiltrated, at the same time the backdoor can also exfiltrate data, and data is basically the result of the backdoor commands and the log file that is regularly rotated. So to exfiltrate this data, they encrypt the data, they put it in they create a PDF document with this data, they attach the PDF document to an email and send the email to the attacker email address. This behavior happens only once the victim sends an email. So it prevents the backdoor to sending email at unusual hour. So this is an example of a PDF created by the backdoor. You can see typical PDF header. Then there is a 1x1 pixel JPEG email, which is encoded in the backdoor. And actually, they will add the encrypted data just after the JPEG image. So the PDF document is valid. You can open it in a PDF viewer. You will just see a blank PDF. If we look on VirusTotal, we can find some operator email addresses. You can see they really look legitimate. So in this example, they use Gmail, Hotmail. But in recent campaigns, we have seen them using gmx.com, and the pattern seems to be always first name dot last name at the free email provider. And sometimes they even impersonate the victim. So we saw them infecting a victim with a sample in which the email address was in the exact name of the victim. So that means it's a very targeted attack because they compile the sample, especially for a particular victim. And actually, in the German incident, it seems it was the same. Akan, who is a German journalist, said that they set up a fake mail account in the name of a significant other of one victim. Regarding the incoming email, it will basically log information about the incoming email and also check if the attachment is a PDF and if it has a special formats that contain the commands. So this is what we saw in the log. It's okay. So they will also hide some UI artifacts. So they will delete, as I said, they will delete all backdoor written message. So the message sent by the backdoor or received from the attackers. They will also put some hooks. So they put hooks on create window X. We can see there is a check for NetUI HWND, which is a type of window, which is actually the kind of window used by Outlook to display notifications. So when the attacker sends an email to the victim, there is no notification displayed. And in the last versions, they switched to NUI dialog, which is, I think, the kind of window used by Outlook on Windows 10 to display the notification. So the backdoor is fully controlled by emails. The commands are contained in PDF documents. And it's operator agnostic. It means that if you took down the email address of the attacker, he can just send an email from any other email address to the victim and regain control of the backdoor. The format is really complex. I think it was to prevent reverse engineering. It's again a valid PDF document and data it's just after a JPEG image. So this is a PDF I crafted. Again, this is the typical header, then the JPEG image, and we can see this is the beginning of what they call the container that contains the command, and there is a magic D. This is the full picture of the structure of the container. So first there are some headers with length, checksum, etc. Then what they call instruction descriptors, which contain information that are then used to decode the instructions. So there is things that the offset of the decryption function in a list that is included in the backdoor DLL. So you need to reverse all the DLL to understand which offset you need to put there. Otherwise, the backdoor won't be able to decrypt the container. And there are other things that, like the decryption key ID or the decompression function ID. Then the batch of instruction, which is encrypted with MIST1. And in a batch of instructions, there are several instructions with a common ID and a list of arguments. The functions are really typical. They can manage folder, launch process, exfiltrate file, and even run PowerShell in memory using PS inject, which is a module of the Empire project. So probably you wonder what is MIST1. But first, Tula has an history of using weird encryption algorithm. So I listed some of them. So they typically don't use common encryption algorithms such as RC4 or AES. They also change all significant values, so it breaks all the tools such as FineCrypt. So we identify the main characteristic of the algorithm and then open Wikipedia to find what was the encryption algorithm used. So it was MIST1, which is like an encryption algorithm developed by Mitsubishi in the 90s. They also made some change. So in the original implementation, there is no initialization vector, but unfortunately for them, the function that derives the key is a bit broken. So if you put a null IV, the resulting key will always be null. So you can encrypt a PDF for any sample regardless the hard-coded key in the sample. And they also made some modification like shuffling the S tables or adding the operation. So now I have a small demo. Okay, so this is the DLL. Oh. What? Okay. So this is the DLL. We can see on regedit the COM object hijacking. So then these are the two PDFs. So this is valid PDF documents. So this one with the snake. Then we open Outlook. So this machine is infected, so I can just send an email to myself. I don't care about the subject and the body. I just need to attach a PDF document. Then I click send and receive. And it pops cal.exe. So it really works. It's just to show you that this backdoor works, and just by sending an email without any user action, you can execute commands. Oh. So now some mitigations. So that's my first advice. Maybe you should delete cal.exe. So one thing interesting to do is to monitor COM object hijacking during the installation process. And to do that, you can use any EDR or write sysmon rules. I also checked to Windows Defender Security Center, which is a console or Windows 10 to tune the security settings. So with the standard settings on Windows 10, it works as well as on Windows 7, but we can try to tune the settings for Outlook. So I checked to disabling the creation of child process. So as you can see, now the backdoor cannot launch cal.exe, but obviously the exfiltration of the emails is still working. But we can enable the code integrity guard, which will prevent the loading of unsigned DLL not signed by Microsoft. Then we relaunch Outlook, and it's missing something on the right. This, if you're not really familiar with the Outlook interface, this is the send receive button. And as I said, the backdoor replaces all map32.dll. So if we prevent the backdoor from being launched, Outlook cannot use map anymore, so you cannot send or receive emails. So this functionality really prevented the backdoor from being launched. You can also try to mitigate on the mail server side by blocking email with a particular PDF format, or monitoring the duplicate sending of emails, because each time the victim sends an email, this email will also be sent just after to the attackers. If you want more information, we release a comprehensive white paper. I put the link to the PDF. We also have some IOCs and YARA rules on our GitHub. And as a conclusion, Turla is not your casual and lazy attackers. They have a big tool set with advanced capabilities, a rootkit, Outlook backdoors. They do man in the middle, watering all, etc. When they enter a network, they stay there for months or even years, and their primary goal is spying. They don't conduct disruptive operations, so you probably won't see they are in your network. And during their long-term campaign, they're able to map the network and grab many credentials. So on compromise, yes, you need to clean the malware, but you also need to rebuild part of your infrastructure and change all the password, etc. Thanks for your attention. If you have questions, we can answer.
Okay, thank you. So, any questions? Okay.
Can you do an estimation on the effort that was done to create this Turla, I don't know, backdoor? I mean, you mentioned it that it's not a simple attack, it's not a lamer attack or whatever. It seems that a lot of effort and investigation was already done in creating it.
Which backdoor? The Outlook backdoor?
The Turla backdoor.
Okay, so the rootkit?
Yes.
I don't really know, but the rootkit is very advanced. It can spy on incoming network traffic, etc. So I don't know how many hours of development it needs, but it's pretty big.
Nice talk. You gave some advice on how to protect or prevent these attacks, right? But from my point of view, like, it seems that there was no way that the victims could have prevented this in any way. It's very hard that any organization, governmental or non-profit or anything like that, can put stuff like that in practice. So it's basically, from what I hear, it's like, if they will get in anyway, so you can probably monitor. Or is there any advice for actual organizations what to do?
Yeah, but the main targets of Turla are big organizations like ministries or big companies. So they have budget to do security. They probably have budget. So these are the kinds of protection you can enable, because the backdoor is not installed with admin rights. So if you tune the setting, for example, in the Windows Defender Security Center, the operators won't be able to disable them. So that's still, I think, a good countermeasure.
Okay. Any more questions?
I have a general one. What's the aim of Turla Group? They hack the governmental organization, and they want to steal data. Do you know, like, the bigger picture? What do they want to achieve? Did you have any thoughts on that? Thanks.
All right. So there are many other organizations that have been there. At ESET, we focus on technical details, but if you go on Google and type Turla, it will be pretty easy to see all the assumptions that are made on this group. That being said, they're going after sensitive data, governments. We can infer what type of organizations might be behind this. They're not worried about money, they're only worried about getting information, getting in sensitive systems. So it's kind of not obvious, but we can infer who might be interested by this type of information.
Okay. More questions? No? Okay. Well, thank you very much, guys.
Thank you.